Hi friends, welcome back. Over the last few episodes in this series, we have spoken about executive search, leadership decisions, and realities of CXO hiring. Today, I want to talk about something that exists in almost every interview I've been a part of, and yet it is something we rarely talk about openly, and that is biases. Not intentional, not always visible, but deeply influential. Because even with structured interviews, scorecards, and multiple stakeholders in the room, hiring decisions are still shaped by human judgment. And human judgment, by its nature, is not neutral. So, when we say bias, most people picture something dramatic, something unfair, something obvious. In practice, it is much quieter than that. Biases in interviews is usually not about being unfair. It is about being unaware. It shows up in small ways. We gravitate towards candidates who think like us. We feel more comfortable with backgrounds that look familiar. We equate confidence with competence. And perhaps the most common of all, we form an opinion in the first 5 minutes and then spend the next 45 looking for evidence to support us. These are not deliberate actions, these are cognitive shortcuts. The brain's way of making quick decisions with limited information. Useful in every day, dangerous when you're hiring leadership positions. There are a few patterns that we have seen. So I see repeat themselves across boardrooms and hiring panels. There is similarity bias, where we favor candidates whose journey resembles ours. There is first impression bias, where the decision is effectively made in the opening minutes and the rest of the interview becomes a formality. There is a halo effect, where one strong signal, a well-known company on the CV, a prestigious degree, a smooth articulation, and quite easily overshadows everything else. And lastly, there comes confidence bias, where we mistake the ability to speak well for the ability to lead well. None of these are new. What is surprising is how rarely they are challenged in real time. Here is something worth sitting with. Bias tends to grow as seniority grows. At junior levels, processes are more structured. There are assessments, technical rounds, objective filters. But at the CXO level, a lot of what you're evaluating is genuinely harder to measure. That is leadership presence, judgment under pressure, influence across peers, and cultural fitment. These are not things you can put on a scorecard. And that is exactly where the biases creeps in. When structure thins out, intuition takes over. And intuition carries all the patterns we have spent our careers building. The good ones and the flawed ones. The consequences of a bias is rarely immediate. It shows up later, sometimes months later, sometimes a year. You realize you have hired someone who fits beautifully, but never actually challenges the organization. You see in the hindsight that the person you overlooked, the one who was less polished in the room, was actually more capable. You look around the leadership table one day and notice that everyone there has a remarkable similar journey. And sometimes the cost is bigger. You end up with leaders who present well but do not deliver consistently, who align upwards comfortably but struggle across teams, who fit the narrative that was sold in the interview room but not the reality of the role. Now, let's talk about illusion of objectivity. Here is the piece I find most counterintuitive. One of the biggest misconceptions in hiring is that more interviews reduce the bias. That if enough people meet the candidate, collective wisdom will correct any individual blind spot. This does not always work that way. In my experience, when the first interviewer comes out with a strong view, especially a positive one, subsequent interviewers often align to it. Not deliberately, just because confirmation is easier than contradiction. So instead of independent evaluation, what you get is a collective validation. 6 interviewers, 1 opinion. So, how can we reduce or eliminate bias? Honestly, no. Bias is a part of human beings making decisions. Trying to eliminate it entirely is unrealistic and, frankly, would strip out the intuition and pattern recognition that experienced interviewers genuinely need. The goal is not removal. The goal is awareness and balance. So let's talk about what helps reduce bias. A few simple shifts can make a difference. Being clear on what success in the role truly looks like, separating likability from capability, and encouraging diverse interviewer perspectives, challenging early conclusions, using structured evaluation as a baseline, and most importantly, being willing to ask, am I evaluating this candidate objectively or comfortably? Now comes the most important aspect, the search partner's role. This is where a strong search partner plays a very critical role. Not just bringing in candidate, but in offering an external perspective, challenging internal alignments, highlighting blind spots, ensuring the process does not become an echo chamber. Because sometimes the most valuable inputs is not an agreement, it is perspective. In executive search, interviews are often seen as the most critical step. But interviews are not just about assessing candidates. They're also about understanding how decisions are being made. Because ultimately, we don't just hire the best candidate. We often hire the candidate we are most comfortable with. And that is where bias quietly shapes outcomes. So the real question is not, was this the right hire? But was this the most objective decision we could have made? Signing off, Rajesh.